Oh, okay. I was just wondering what was happening there because my Wi-Fi has been a bit on and off. Work from home, not always ideal either. Huh? It's flexible, but Wi-Fi is important. Okay. Hey, Donabet, how are you?
Hey, Christoph, all good?
Yeah, I can't complain. I was just talking to Steven. He says I'm terribly busy. Well, same here.
Good.
We're uh,
Good.
we're running towards business validation and a big engagement, the one that we discussed before.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Cool.
it's a madhouse right now. Everything happens
Yeah,
at the same
okay.
time.
Better that way than the other.
No, yeah, that's true. It's you always want the thing that you don't have. Huh? When it's quiet, you want to
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
busy. You want to be quiet, huh?
Yeah. Someone once told me, no matter how many projects, bring in the projects, we deal with the delivery later.
All right. I'm just gonna kick it off. We'll see who else is gonna join. So let's see which one I should be presenting here. And please do let me know if you see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thanks, Fitri. All right. So today is a bit about testing, where I recently have a lot of experience working with one specific test tool, which is Tricentis. And of course, in the 25 years that I've been doing this, I've a lot of experience with all kinds of different things. But today is really about things SAP centric. And we just wanted to give you a bit of background and share our experience and so forth. Because SAP changes so many things all the time. It's good to have a bit more background. Now, I'm actually waiting for Graham to join. He told me he would be here, but he also had a flight. And here in Indonesia, some problems with a volcano that erupted. So there's a bunch of flights that are canceled and reshuffled and whatever. So maybe he couldn't make it. So we'll see. If he appears, then great. If he doesn't, you'll need to make do with me. So essentially, who are we? So Graham obviously is not there. He's actually my lead functional architect and currently working in a very big program in New Zealand. And I am, well, for the ones who already know me, I'm Christoph de Rijn. I've been actually almost close to 30 years in the meanwhile working in the IT industry. Now, across that long period, I've done pretty much everything. Started off as an infra guy, got into shared services transformation, did application management, offshoring, you name it. I've been involved in pretty much anything in the IT space. And in the last 10 years, I built up Delaware in Southeast Asia, which I left in 2023 to start with Icon. Now, with Icon, maybe I should give you a bit of background on that. So Icon historically is a technology staffing company. In the last few years, I joined, and we've basically added a few different things to our portfolio. So initially, we were Singapore-centric. Now we actually cover the whole of APJ, and we're building up a footprint in EMEA. So we have in Eastern Europe, we have a company now, and we are setting up offices in Western Europe also. So we deliver staffing, so staff augmentation for SAP projects. And I'm responsible for everything related to services. So we deliver services around application managed services, DevOps around the BTP platform, and S/4HANA public cloud deployments. And these, they complement each other. Sometimes you need a bit more from this, sometimes you need a bit more from that. So we combine these things to efficiently and effectively deliver solutions to customers in mainly Japan, Australia, and in Western Europe. We have a few big customers in Belgium and in Switzerland, which we serve respectively out of our nearshore locations in Vietnam and in Eastern Europe. All right, now, for the people who have been with us in sessions like this before, I always start with a few questions because I kind of want to gauge whatever is related to this particular topic. So we start with a question. Fitri, can you please prompt the survey? And then we take a few minutes to complete the survey, which I hope all of you will take part in. So we get kind of a bit of a feeling on what is all happening in this field. So you can scroll down So the first question is, what best describes your current experience with test automation and SAP projects? And given the diversity of people, I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of different experience in that area. And some of you may be not involved in the testing area at all, maybe just more in a functional area or a technical area. But all of us at some point in our lives probably were exposed to this. So that's kind of where I want to know, where does the audience sit? How much experience do you guys have in that area? And then if you scroll down, you will see that there is a second question related to test automation tools. Now I just put a few of the more prominent ones, the more recent ones. And if you have done anything with, I don't know, Load Runner or whatever, everything, all those other tools are under other. I think the names that we have put on there are probably the more prevalent ones. But I know I was doing some research before I got into this, and I think there's like 1,000 test tools out there. So it can be pretty much anything. Huh? Okay, so let's see. We have 6 people who have answered to the poll so far. 7, thank you very much. So I'll give it a few more moments, and then we will show the outcome of the poll. Of course, I can already see there's quite a few people that are relatively new to testing, and there's one person who has probably even a lot more experience than I do in that area, which is interesting. And test suite distribution, kind of roughly what I expected. So we have 8 of 12 respondents. I'll just close the poll, end poll, and then I'll put the results on screen. Now everyone should see what I'm seeing, I hope, which is the outcome. So if you look at the testing, out of the 8 people that responded, there's the majority that is actually relatively new to test automation and SAP projects, either completely new or had something or had some exposure through others. And there is then one person that has very experienced, a very high level of experience in terms of test automation and SAP projects. And then you have the tools. So if you scroll down again, you will see SAP ECAT, CBTA, and Tricentis are apparently reasonably used, especially only 8 people replied to this. And out of the 8, 7 actually use one of the tools that we thought would be the most commonly used tool. So actually there we're in the right ballpark. I'm just curious, I don't know who answered other. I couldn't make it a free text field because of the limitations of Zoom, but I'm actually curious to understand what this other tool then would be. So whoever filled out other, would be nice if you can just put it in the chat for me for future reference, because I'm always just curious to understand what that other tool then was, and also how you liked the tool. So that's a secondary piece of information which I find interesting. All right, then we go on to the meat of the session. So as I mentioned, we're 10 minutes in. It's probably going to be another 15 minutes or something like that. And then after these 15 minutes, we have room for discussion. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I have Fitri, who is also in the call from my side, who will keep an eye on the chat. If there is any questions, she will basically prompt them at the end of the session. If you want to interrupt me with a question, of course, don't hesitate, please do. So why do we do testing? Now, I wanted to give you some framework or some thoughts around how much money we actually spend on testing. So on the left-hand side, you can see IT budgets allocated to quality assurance between 23 and 28%. So this is, of course, not just testing, it's also the associated processes. But we spend a lot of time on making sure that things are right. Now, if you look at the graph in the middle, what is typically a challenge in terms of not just software delivery, but also platform deliveries? Testing. I mean, it's something you need to very deliberately think about. And if it's not done right, it leads to a lot of problems down the road. I see it every day. We rush developments through, the business is pushing. And if we skip testing or we miss something out, then we can cause pretty severe problems in the system. And of course, that's something that you want to want to avoid. Now, in my experience, in most of the projects that I have been in the last, I don't know, 5-6 years, automated testing has more often than not been used. Now, that is not good, because test automation typically helps us run more tests and run tests more consistently. So if we do test automation, we can actually free up a lot of time for other activities. And even though initially it takes a reasonable level of investment. Then, evolution of software testing. So if you look at where we were in the 80s, everything was manual. Slowly we got some automation tools, we got scripting. And as time progressed in the 2010s, we started with what they then call continuous testing. So the recurring testing as part of your development lifecycle or deployment lifecycle. And today, there's a lot of tools that claim that they have AI to help you accelerate testing even further. Now, that AI sauce, we do put on everything and anything today. And I think in some areas, it does provide us help. But in many areas, it's still not perfect. So what to talk about or what to think about when we go and do testing. And I'll just quickly run this through. So in principle, we start at project initiation. You need to develop a test strategy. If you go and do your analysis, you need to develop your test scenarios. You also need to decide which test scenarios you're going to automate and which ones you're going to do manual. And I'll come back to that in a bit to highlight where the benefit is for each, because it doesn't make sense to automate just anything. Some things still need to be manual. Then, of course, we need to make sure that we think about how are we going to do error handling? How are we going to handle issues that come out of our testing? And recording everything is crucial, because this is your future body of knowledge, and this is your basically the content repository that allows you to understand better where you went wrong, what kind of issues you can foresee for the future, and how you can prevent some of these issues from recurring. And of course, after we have done all of that, we'll do a replay, and then once we're happy with the outcomes, we'll deploy, and we do continuous monitoring. So as part of continuous monitoring, regression testing, when we release new things, is also part of that area. Now, typically 3 big actions: test case creation, maintenance, and execution. And I mean, you can read, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but in test automation, if you do test case creation, all of that is manual. And it takes a bit of time because it needs to be step by step, very detailed and so forth. And I see, and I was talking, I think it was with Steven in the beginning. So we're currently running a big engagement where we use Tricentis for test automation. And if you don't work out your test scripts well, then you can automate, but the outcomes are not going to be great. So it's something that is time consuming, and you really need to think through. You should be able to run things end to end properly before you can actually go and automate things. Then in what they then say codeless test automation tools, so the new generation of test automation tools which come with AI and so forth, they have some level of automation in terms of recording. And I'll come to that a bit later as well. Tricentis also has a flavor of this, which can help in accelerating some of the work with respect to the test case creation, the recordings, and so forth. If we look at test case maintenance, now, of course, most of us use testing during a project, and many probably use it to a certain extent in terms of regression. But testing, the volume becomes very big, and it becomes very difficult to maintain everything. So whether things are manual or whether things are automated, there's always a need to make sure that your test cases are periodically reviewed to make sure that everything still works properly. And to some extent, small changes in the system can be managed by automation tools to adjust the test scripts where they need to be adjusted. But there is plenty of things that still can break. And we see this on a day-by-day basis as well. And at the end of the presentation, I'll give you some highlights on where we see some of the biggest problems in in the test tools that we currently use. So I don't only share the good, but also share some tips and tricks on this is stuff where you need to watch out and you need to manage. Because if you know upfront, you can take it into consideration in your planning, and as a consequence, you can make your testing and your test approach much more effective. Now, this is a table just a bit on a high level. I think all of us kind of understand the difference between automation or automated testing and manual testing. In the automation, I think the key things are time savings, because you can run testing independently in background, or not in background, but you can run it independently from a user performing any data input. So you can use virtual machines, you run these things on a separate schedule. You can schedule it to be run in the night and things like this. So with automation, that is of course possible, but manual, that is not. Now, automation, typically there is a big upfront investment, because having your test scripts, assuming that you already use them in your day-to-day operations, if you want to put them in a tool, you need to buy the tool, you need to do all the initial setup and so forth. That is a big upfront investment, and that you don't have with manual testing. I mean, you put a testing team up there. If they have the test scripts, they can basically do everything as they go, because they get test scripts and they will start testing. So cost effectiveness, short term, automation typically is expensive. Longer term, and because of the reusability, automation can give you big benefits, and it will also allow you to do a more in-depth testing than you would do with manual testing. Plus, it removes human error. Once a test script is good and you have a proper maintenance cycle on those, you can actually be sure that when you run your testing, it's going to be very predictable in terms of outcomes. So what kinds of tests then can be automated? Now you see a bunch of them here. I think regression is for me a very big use case. Unit tests, less so, because typically you develop something, then you don't want to build an automation tool for something you develop once and then release. But in the end, at the end of the sequence, once you have the full functionality in your production environment, the different test scripts that you make and automate for unit tests, you can string together so they become an end-to-end test script. And you can use them, for instance, for regression testing or smoke testing and so forth. So this one, I mean, I like Casper and Hobbes. So this is always in regression. You fix one bug, you introduce several new bugs. And we see this all the time. You change a small component in SAP, you release it, something else somewhere else breaks. And if you don't have your regression fully under control, you don't have proper controls in terms of regression testing, these things will happen sooner or later. And even if you have it very well under control, they will still happen on occasion, but the frequency will be much lower. So where to strike a balance? I'm just also gonna go through this largely. Automated versus manual testing. So manual testing, usability, user acceptance testing, you really don't want to go and automate. Scenario testing or testing of new functionality and so forth. If it's just exploratory, that's typically in the top right. Now, top left, functional tests, prototypes, simulations, and so forth. Everything related to regression and things like that, you can put under automated, with the exception of maybe some small functionalities which are more difficult to automate. So when does it make sense and when does it not make sense to do test automation? Now, manual testing is typically initial development, initial configuration, unit test, short-term projects, when it doesn't make sense to really spend a lot of money on this, and it's a tool that is pretty predictable and doesn't need to change much over time. Now, if you have a long roadmap, of course, you're going to look at doing automation for all the reasons that I just mentioned earlier. And then we actually get into what does SAP propose. So this is a copy of a slide of SAP. No doubt you recognize their typical logo usage. So SAP has these 4 different SKUs that they bring to market. But of course, this is a third-party solution by another company. And SAP repackages it and resells it as a Solex solution. So they have change impact. Now, that change impact story I find very interesting, actually, for every SAP user, because it allows you to reduce the impact on on the volume of testing that you need to go and do. And I have a slide on this in a minute. Then the continuous test automation, this is basically a modular library of tests that you can use to execute testing on a kind of a scheduled basis. I mean, you can, of course, do interactive testing. You can run it yourself on your own PC, but typically you will use this continuous test automation to make sure that you test a lot more than you would in a classic setup. Then you also have an additional component that SAP has around cross-application testing. So since this is a third-party solution, and you can see Tosca, Data Integrity, and Neoload, they're basically different products from Tricentis, the company Tricentis, and they basically do any application, not just SAP-centric, but SKUs that SAP brings to the fore are typically SAP-centric. And then you have a last module, which is no-code performance testing. Now, if you work on an SAP platform that is hosted by SAP, then in principle, you can assume that SAP takes care of performance. But still, there is this tool available that you can use to do load testing in private hosted solutions or in bespoke developments and so forth to see how scalable they are. In one of the projects that I'm currently going, we have an interface between Salesforce and SAP. And that interface is very heavily loaded. It was initially designed and built, and the business didn't feel like load testing was going to be required. And of course, the moment that the real volume came, we ended up in trouble, and we had some work to be done to go and correct that. So you can't always influence and help make people make the right decisions. But in principle, this is a typical use case where we should have used performance testing to make sure that we can level to the scale that was required for that particular interface. So where do these different tools sit? So if you look at the change impact analysis, this one basically will do an analysis of whatever is contained in your SAP transports, and it will make an association with the various SAP objects. So change impact analysis in private cloud solutions or the RISE private edition, you can use this one to identify any development that you release, which SAP objects will be touched, and which test scripts as a consequence you will need to run. Very interesting, large environments, complex environments, because this one basically will limit the volume of testing that you really need to go and do. Now, the actual test coordination or test execution is run by this SAP Enterprise Continuous Testing. That's basically the Tosca tool by Tricentis. It has a library of test scripts, and those you can basically sequence and plan and schedule and so forth. And then in the production environment, of course, you can also run performance testing if you so would wish. I personally don't have experience with this one because we haven't used it yet, but it is one of the tools that SAP offers to the market. Then this slide I found interesting because I just gave you a voiceover a minute ago on, okay, change impact analysis, what does it do? This makes it visible. So if you have an SAP system, and here in this SAP system, you have over 3,000 SAP objects that are in use. Now, the impact analysis will basically identify a subset of your total SAP objects, and then you can determine either all these objects you want to run the test scripts for, or you can do further analysis and say, okay, which are the most at risk objects? So you can prioritize your testing. You do first your most at risk, and if you have still time left, you can basically run the rest of the test scripts to make sure that all your impacted objects are validated in terms of your regression, which means in this case, you have first 3,000 objects, but then a bit over 2,000 are potentially impacted or affected. But you see the core most at risk items are maybe, 500 items there. So you can really help in the scheduling and planning and do the right things first. So this is actually something I think is pretty cool. So for those who don't know, so Tricentis has a partnership with SAP. Tricentis is a company that has been around for about 20 years, a little bit less. And they were one of the first companies to do this continuous testing, to do a new testing approach with low code, no code approach to help with test recording and all these kind of things. So they have a pretty big footprint, about 3,000 customers around the world. They're pretty much everywhere. So the moment that you want to work with them, you can go and talk to them in pretty much every country around the world. And they have this Solex relationship with SAP. So SAP resells these SKUs, which I just showed, whereby in the typical SAP way, SAP will bundle a number of different solutions from Tricentis, and they will offer them as the 4 SKUs, which I just showed. Now, if there is an interest to work either beyond SAP, because you want to, I don't know, you want to do testing on your Salesforce or on your MES or something along those lines, you can actually also use Tricentis for this. And in those cases, you can go directly to Tricentis and discuss with them, because the SAP SKUs that they sell are really SAP centric. So in principle, they're meant for SAP testing. So then how do you position Tricentis? Now, it depends a bit on what your overall strategy is, which tools you all have in-house and so forth. But essentially, because Tricentis is a front-end tool and it mimics the behavior of a user, you can basically test pretty much anything with it. And you can test across applications, you can test across interfaces, make sure that you do one thing in application A, validate the result in application B, and so forth. So it's just a few names here, your SAP, Oracle, ServiceNow, and so forth. But in principle, every application with a UI, you should be able to do test automation with Tricentis. Now, the analysts, and I mean, I don't know if any of you have been in working with either Gartner or Forrester. So on the left, you have the Magic Quadrant, and on the right, that's the Forrester Wave report. So Tricentis scores high in these areas. I always have a bit I'm a bit a skeptic on these quadrants, because they're heavily influenced on how heavily you engage these analysts. So the more you engage, the bigger packages you take, the more opportunity you get to influence your ranking. But still, I mean, there is a clear indication still on where something sits, or what the rough value is of a particular solution. And that's typically how I interpret these things, because they are not the only answer on how good a solution is. So you have the analysts, and then you have the real world. And if you look at the real world, I've been also browsing a bit and having a bit of a further feedback, because some people here probably want to know what the experiences are with Tricentis. Now, I have about 2 years of experience with it right now across 3 different projects, which is not major, but it's also not nothing. But I thought, let's see what the internet has to say. So I did a bit of research, and I mean, the slides will be shared later, and I'm not going to go through every single detail. But the not so good part is typically one of the areas where you need to look or watch out for, right? Now, in terms of test maintenance, if you set up the application right, and you have a proper test strategy with a proper architecture around your testing, then your test maintenance can actually be relatively easy. Now, if you start the wrong way and things become a bit of a mess, then it becomes difficult to maintain. Also, if you have a lot of really heavy customizations in your system, it can lead to complexities in maintaining your test cases, especially so when these customizations have frequent changes and so forth, because that leads to a cascading effect where your test scripts and your test recordings also need to be updated. What I see is across all these items, usability for business users. That's probably an interesting area. Now, Tricentis will typically highlight we are very user-friendly. Now, this is, in my reading, very similar to the way that SAP is user-friendly. So if you know SAP and you know it very well, then it's not a problem. But if you don't know SAP and you start using it for the first time, it's a pretty steep learning curve. So Tricentis is similar because it has a lot of capabilities, and to get to know all the different capabilities and string them together in the right way, it takes a lot of enablement. So it's not something you can just give to a user and say, start your testing, good luck. It's not as intuitive as that. So it really takes proper architecture, proper design, proper approach, educate your people, and then you can really get value out of it, but it takes time. This is not something that you do overnight. Now, my personal experience with this, if you look at our experience now in the last 1.5 years or almost 2 years. So it's what I mentioned in the previous slide. It's very versatile. It's really broad, but it comes with a steep learning curve. It has a lot of different modules which work together. And if set up right, it scales tremendously. It can really reduce testing time significantly, but that test strategy and approach is absolutely critical to avoid losing oversight. If you start with one thing and you just want to play around with it, great, but then please throw it out before you actually want to build something that is going to be there for the longer term. I've seen it often also with software platforms that we develop. Oh, it will only be there for a year. And then 10 years later, that thing is still there and everyone is suffering. And in the same way, here you need to think before you do. What we also see is on S4 public cloud, test case maintenance is higher. And the reason for that is very simple. In public cloud, SAP releases updates frequently. Right now, they do 2 major releases of functionality per year, but intermediately, they also release hot fixes and so forth. And the consequence of this is that in Fiori, you will have changes of IDs of the tiles. So the moment that you have done a recording, the recording uses the IDs of the tiles as references to be able to find out which tile it needs to go and open and so forth. And on S4 public, after every upgrade, you basically need to go and check the test scripts because if the tiles have changed, your tests may not run very well anymore. It's not a huge amount of work. So it can be done a relatively short time. If you have a few hundred test scripts, you want to run them through, then it's actually manageable in a day or maybe 2, depending on the size of the team that you have. But it is an attention point. We haven't seen the same type of challenges on an on-prem or a private cloud deployment and so forth, where things are typically much more controlled. Then what we also see, and I mean, this is not going to be a surprise for anyone, if you do testing, then you need to make sure that your environment is properly set up in the sense that I'm now running a very big deployment for a company that's present in 130 countries. And our SAP instance is in the US, but my users are pretty much everywhere. And if we want to have testing done, we get issues with latency on the internet. So to be able to address that, we use virtual machines. I put it here as VMs, but we use virtual machines which sit close by the SAP platform and the Salesforce platform that is integrated with. Because if we don't do that, we get unpredictable outcomes in terms of our testing. If we run them on the VM, everything runs end to end, no problem. And in half an hour, or whatever, these things are done. If you run them on your own PC and your PC is in Cambodia and you run it against a system that is in the US, then some moments everything will run well. And some moments you get all kinds of errors, timeouts, and so forth because of the latency of the internet. And SAP is also not as responsive. So these things typically cause trouble. Now, this is not new. I've seen this in other test solutions as well, but it is something to take into consideration. Now, the last thing, and we have talked to several customers around this. If you look at what SAP has on offer, so the various SAP offerings are really SAP centric, so for SAP testing, but they're also at a high lowest entry point. So they're not cheap. Now, SAP, I mean, we all know typically SAP is not very cheap, and they're no different in the Tricentis area because the minimum SKU is actually quite large, which means that for small mid-market customers, it's very difficult to find a viable use case that allows this type of investment for adoption of the SAP offer. And sometimes they don't need everything that is in these SKUs. Maybe they need, I don't know, only certain components and so forth. And this is something that still needs to be sorted out. So that's a discussion that you then can have with either with SAP or with Tricentis, and something to keep in the back of your mind if you're deciding on where to go with your testing. All right, 36 minutes, reasonable, 5 minutes over time, but that's all the slides that I actually wanted to walk through. If anyone has any practical questions or any questions at all, then the floor is open.
I think we have a question from Paul. He is asking, are we not missing a step? 1, create test strategy, and 2, create business test scenario, and then 3, create test scripts.
I think your sequence is correct. Yeah.
You know me, Christopher. I'd always find an awkward question for you.
That's okay. No worries. I mean, if I was trying to find a balance between how much to go into detail on the tool and how much to go into detail on the general testing. It's not easy to find a balance because I mean, we could talk for hours about this one, but you're right. I mean, these are that need to be added. Yeah.
Absolutely. And my logic here is right. Any organization that you speak to, you mention testing and they go, yeah, okay, fine. But they don't realize the effort and the labor involved in it. Now, if I sit, let's assume that you're not technical for a moment. If I sit you down and say, create a test script, you're going to think I'm from Mars, right? What is it? But the further step, if you actually go back and say, let's create an end-to-end business process. What do you do today? What do you expect to do tomorrow? And then go from there. So they write down the business scenario of what actually happens in the business. Then we can quickly define a test script and then automate it.
That's true. Now there is something new on the horizon, Paul. That is when I talked about that change impact analyzer. The moment that the change impact analyzer identifies these are the objects that that are going to be affected, it can identify if there is going to be some new tests that are going to be required because you know you have your library of test scripts and so forth, and you can use the an automation tool, an automated recording analyzer. It's AI based, so it does automated screen recording and so forth, which means that one doesn't really look from a business process perspective per se. It just looks from an end-to-end system perspective, and it will record the various screens to validate that a particular object can be properly assessed or functions properly, which means I agree with you. We need to have the end-to-end from a business perspective. That is really the gold standard. But in the meanwhile, we have this potential help from specific context-specific automation that we can also leverage off. And that is also part of Tricentis, this ARA tool.
That's perfect. But you don't really want to take away the importance of testing from the business user. Because if they think it's going to get automated, then it's all done. They don't, for me, it's part of the maturing of the business to say everything we do, all of those customizations that you think you want, you need to test those. Let me give you an example. 6 weeks before go live, I had a client who wanted the key fob that you used to get into a building. They said, well, we want to put this into SAP. I said, brilliant idea, because you'll know where the nearest printer is to you. You don't want to be printing 10 miles or 10 kilometers away in your own office if you're visiting another office of the same company, of course. So if your key fob knows which building you're in, then it'll print to the nearest printer in that corner office that you're sitting in today. Now, it's a brilliant functionality, but 6 weeks before go live, it's nuts. To try and actually say to people and convince the business that let's go live with what we've got right now, and remember the workaround or the current as is they've got to just go and do a drop-down menu and pick the printer themselves. So not a biggie. So if you go live with the current as is, and then 4 weeks into your hypercare, then you can go, hey, you know what? We're just about to make something else easy for you. It, in my mind, it helps to take on.
Fair. Okay. We have a bunch of other questions I see. I'm just reading in the chat. Let's see. Cloud ALM. Oh, Pam, you were asking something about others. So SAP Cloud ALM. Yeah, Cloud ALM, you can do all the scheduling and so forth. Now, Cloud ALM can also integrate, I mean, you indicate here Charm, but can integrate with Tricentis as well. So Tricentis actually provides that capability. And in one of the projects in Europe where and that's a very large engagement, they're using Signavio for design. And they use from Signavio, they drive the business processes into Tricentis, which then does the test automation.
Yeah.
So you can basically link those as well. Yeah.
Similar situation with my current client.
And how's it working for you?
I don't do the testing, but just the management, but they have issues with the integration. And like I said, they prefer the old version using the Charm. So a bit of a challenge with this testing tool
Okay.
for the team. Yeah.
And in your case, it's Charm that they use, or they use Tricentis as well?
Previously, but with the ALM, it has a challenge. It's not as perfect as, not perfect, but as ideal as what Charm does. So that's the complaint of the team.
Okay. All right. Then Vina, is Vina still here, or Vina is here still? Vina, you indicated does Tricentis provide a plug-and-play adapter for third-party testing involving SAP?
Yes, I'm part of a large, corporation transformation, and we are using like open text ALM, and for testing, it's like I'm like testing with 230 third-party systems. It's very difficult for us to go and do an end-to-end testing, and like for most of these integrations, we are using SAP Cloud ALM in conjunction with the open text ALM for SAP testing by itself. The question is like, does Tricentis go and give you a plug and play device kind of a thing? Like you've got like Salesforce plug and play adapters with SAP that helps you, seamless integration testing and other things. So does that happen with Tricentis as well?
Yeah, so Tricentis does integrate with Cloud ALM as well, out of the box.
Okay. But if it is something like a Delphi or a Boomi or something, or a Coupa, does it also provide adapters to that?
I need to check. That is a question I will take away, Vina. I'm happy to share that after the session, so I'll take note of that. So we look that up. We have access to the Tricentis, the back office anyway, so I should be able to clear that for you easily.
Okay, sure. Thank you. I've got a bunch of other questions as well.
Go
So,
ahead.
yeah, you explained all the functionality of Tricentis. My question is HP Service Manager, which was there earlier. They sort of had Service Manager, then they sort of like broke Service Manager into ALM, and then built up Service Manager to do something sort of a ServiceNow tool. Okay, HP has its own version of it. So I want to know how different is Tricentis from HP Service Manager actually, because that would provide me a testing ability along with tracking defects, incident management, problem management, everything in one tool. So I'm just interested, how different is this?
Well, in Tricentis, it's of course test centric, which means you can track your test cases, your end-to-end, your issues, but it doesn't act like an incident management platform. So it's really something you need to integrate with an incident management platform. So I don't know ServiceNow or the HP Service Manager very well, to be honest. Once in a long distance, I probably use it for this or that, but I don't know it very well. So it's difficult for me to make a real comparison. But I think based on what you say, the big difference is it's not an ITSM tool that allows you to do end-to-end service management. It's really test-centric.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you look at HP Service Manager, it performs your ITSM processes post go live. But even during implementation, like, you will, when you're doing regression testing, integration testing, you have to track defects. You have to track it somewhere. When we are doing testing for the first time, it's not like always a hunky-dory kind of a scenario. You'll like have so many defects that needs to be tracked. So I'm just interested how Tricentis allows you to do that.
Well, I mean, Tricentis has the library of the issues that it has encountered, and it allows you to track those case by case. So you will basically have the overview of all your test scripts, which with the good and the bad, and you have a reporting engine on top of that. It just doesn't link to a ticketing system as such.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Got it. I think I have another.
Yeah, you mentioned one more here, Vina. Does Tricentis provide the ability to handle different flows of a single scenario from end-to-end standpoint? So,
okay. I'll probably just give you a basic background of what my ask is. So I'm from a distribution and logistics background. I have to do end-to-end flows. And when it comes to distribution, I've got like a direct supply, then I've got like something being delivered out of stock. All this will come in a single scenario actually. So how does Tricentis go and like handle this?
So this is where I mentioned in the beginning, it's important to think about how your test strategy is going to be, because we typically try to do component testing. We make shorter test scripts, which you can string together in broader scenarios. Because if you have a big end-to-end scenario, and your big end-to-end scenario actually covers 6 different steps across different areas, then you want to have a variant of that scenario where one of the steps is a bit different and so forth. You basically would need to do the entire recording or edit the recording when you want to go and do the change, which of course is not ideal. So typically we try to have smaller components which we can string together to be tested in sequence to cover your end-to-end business flow. Does that make sense?
Like maybe typically in a smaller corporation, what you say would work, but in a large corporation, I'll just give you an example. Like, if I take, any retail organization, like I'm based out of Australia, so I'll just take Coles as an example. Okay. It's a major retail chain. When I, as a customer, go in and place an order, I'll go and place multiple different orders, which probably need to be picked up from different shelves. Right. So how does Tricentis go and handle this flow? It's not like I'm having one scenario. It is like one single scenario that sort of diverges into so many multiple scenarios, just dependent on what the part is that or the material that you place, on the order. So how does Tricentis handle that kind of a scenario? I love automation, and that is the reason I'm putting up all these questions. I've been trying to see how we can automate all these kind of things when it comes to implementation testings, because in implementation testings, the testing cycles are usually very smaller. For a large corporation, like a 3-year transformation project, the testing cycle is only a year, and there's so much that needs to be thought about and put forward. So I'm just trying to see if there is automation possible in Tricentis.
Can I, Christopher? Can I help answer that question? So, and excuse my antagonistic answer here, Vera. How would you do it today with manual testing? So, and if I could try to answer that, it will be very manual, very hard work, very laborious. Tricentis is not a magic tool that's going to fix everything. So I think what Christoph said earlier is that, you break it down into more manageable scenarios, because it could be, as you said, quite complex.
Thanks, Paul. So yeah, indeed, I'm building on that. So let's use your scenario, Avina. The moment I order product A, I need sequence of events A through D. I ordered product B, I need sequence of events C through F. which basically will be different, right? So
Yeah.
your first part could be the ordering, because in the ordering, whether I order A or B or C or whatever product, the ordering process is probably going to be the same UI. I just select a different SKU and so forth. And the moment that I complete that part, which is the ordering, that would be the end of the first part. And then you can say, okay, look, I have 7 different SKUs or 200 different SKUs that all have their own flow. Then each one needs to be documented, because you need to have the documentation anyway, because you need to have it in the system, right? So you have a specification, and for each of the specifications, you will create a separate recording. And then if you want to test end to end, you say play number 1 and number 2, play number 1 and number 3, play number 1 and number 4. And these are the parameters that you use as input, because then your number 1 will run with choose product A, your number 2 will run with the second flow will run with choose product B, and so forth. And then you string things together to create your end-to-end flow.
Okay.
Okay, Steven, you mentioned here does Tricentis SAP's offer screen recording for defining detailed test script. Yes, it does that. It is common. My guys are currently playing around with this automatic recording. It's called ARA, automatic recording. I don't remember what the last A stands for. Anyway, this is the AI-based automatic magic tool. We're only just starting to play around with that one, so I don't know how good it is. But right now we have done pretty much everything manual in terms of recording, whereby most of the time it works quite well. With that caveat, in public cloud, we see when the screens get refreshed and some of the tiles get renumbered, we end up in trouble sometimes.
Okay. And if you don't have use recording, how do you build up your test then in Tricentis?
You can also do scripting.
Yeah, but that is a massive amount of work, I can imagine.
It is. Yeah. So typically you use recording because it's the quickest way. Yeah.
Yeah, because in my company, they are trying to do it the quick and dirty way, between the soup and the potatoes, as we say here. But I'm quite convinced that will never work, because we will need to invest too much time for small and medium companies, which are our customers.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. It doesn't fit everywhere either. I mean, and you shouldn't be automating just everything either. It's the common processes, the ones that you know are going to change over time, the ones that are potentially subject to regression and so forth. Those, yes. But I mean, if you talk about the true localization stuff, for instance, we're doing a deployment to 130 countries. We have a bunch of interfaces that we have with government bodies for electronic invoicing and so forth in, I don't know, Egypt and in the Middle East and whatever. We don't put those through Tricentis because it doesn't make sense. It's too much work to make it stable and to maintain for the occasional test that we actually need to go and do. So you need to make some choices. Yeah. All right. That was all the questions that were in the chat that I could see, at least. And we're pretty much on time. So last call, is there anyone that actually still has any question or remark or feedback, which I would also appreciate? If not, then I thank you for your time, and I hope to see you around next time. If you have any further questions, you can always ping me. I'm on LinkedIn, or you can drop me an email or something. Should be, I'll definitely reply.
Thank you, Christoph.
Thanks. Thanks, Pam.
Bye.
Thanks, Steven.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Donabet.
Bye. Bye.